in the context of the book, actually, one of the things that I was reminded of was Kevin Hambley a couple of years back was doing an interview on the Net Live. I think it was shortly after it took over Stanford. And he brought up the idea that he only spends about 7% of his time actually involved in volleyball. And the rest of it is everything else. So essentially your book is kind of talking about the everything else, isn't it?
Exactly.
Absolutely. I mean, do you think that number, is Kevin's number fair as far as you're concerned?
Boy, I mean, I haven't tracked it for sure, but I think it could be. Yeah, it could be. It does seem, I will say it probably changes through the course of the year, or even through the course of the season. In fact, I just said to my staff when we were coming home on Sunday that I've got to start saying no to everything now except volleyball. And as we talk about in the book, right, it says if it doesn't fall into those three categories, I shouldn't be doing it.
Mm-hmm.
COVID's blown that up. There's just too many. I'm not comfortable delegating a lot of the decisions on COVID policies, procedures. And so
Right.
I've been quite involved. And, I have to be. I mean, we have had coaches meetings every week just on COVID with administration,
Wow.
so, but now we're at the point like where we just I've got to change that percentage.
Yeah.
It's hurting us right now, I think a little bit.
Yeah, because you're in season. Ian, I think it's the last chapter or maybe the second to the last chapter. There's a quote that I really liked that I kind of wished was at the beginning. And it's management without leadership creates efficiency, but not effectiveness. I think it's a great quote to start off with. And I think it's totally appropriate. Why didn't you put that in the beginning? Why did you hold that till the end?
Yeah, I read your review, and of course, and my co-author and I, Leo Hopf, have actually had discussions on that point. We really did feel like it does have a lot to do with management. It really, it's not that it's not about leadership. I mean, I think if you can't get the management of your program down, I think that's in fact the premise of the whole book, that
Right.
if you can't get the management down, it's hard to spend time on anything else. And so, yeah, leadership, of course, is really important, but you got to take care of the nuts and bolts to even start thinking creatively to get to, kind of leading a program and a team.
Right. So essentially the book is about creating like a well-oiled machine.
Yeah. I mean, you want it functioning so you can I go crazy if I have to reinvent the wheel. It just drives me crazy. And so I've been here a long time. And so I've always had some pretty good systems in place because I think that's such a waste of time that if it's not broken, don't fix it, just create systems. And that's, I just anymore, I especially since writing the book and working with Leo, if something doesn't have a system, it's going to have a system. We're not going to spend time. I think it's really easy to sit around and talk about things. And at the end of the day, I value brainstorming sessions a lot. But if you don't move the dial and get something in place for it to actually get into practice, then you're spinning your wheels.
Right. Yeah. The systems things was one of the things that I took on when I got here. I was like, okay, listen, there's stuff that we do all the time that we need to have a way, this is how we're going to do it.
Yep.
Because otherwise, if one person's doing it this way and somebody else is doing that way and a different person does it the next time and they don't know what they're doing, yeah, it's just me full time. So,
right, exactly.
So,
yep.
So I envy your ability to delegate as much as you with your full-time staff. I do as much as I can.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've had to deal with in this situation, and this isn't a slight on anybody in particular, but the staff member that essentially wants to do too much, do more than is required. They're so eager to do whatever it happens to be that they take on things that they don't need to take on. Yep. And I mean, obviously from your perspective in the book, you're talking about as head coach, you needed to delegate things. And at a certain point within the staff, there's no one else down the line that somebody can delegate to. So how do you teach your staff the stop point? It's like, okay, no. That's not important.
Yeah. I think that's a real issue. In fact, I have to teach my staff how to delegate, because if they, if there is somebody to delegate to, if it's
Mhm.
not the end of the line, then they need to do that if it doesn't fall within their framework. And it's exactly what you said, that number one, they're eager to learn it, which is a great problem to have. So they want to do it so they can learn it. Or they want to please you as a head coach.
Right.
Or they just have a overinflated sense of what they can do, which happens a lot.
Yeah.
So I have conversations with my assistants all the time, like, does that fall within your area of responsibility? And if it doesn't, delegate it. And if it doesn't need to be done, I mean, I think that's a really key point of the delegation, is if there's no one to delegate to, then you have to decide if it really does move the dial for your team, if it's really important enough to spend time on. And if it doesn't, you might just need to let it go. But no, John, I spent a lot of time with my staff helping them understand about delegation as well, and saving them from themselves. I'd often say to my assistants, I often say to them, hey, no, you're not doing that. You don't need to spend time on that. Our
Right.
DLs will do that or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, in my situation, both my assistants have full-time jobs. So the work that they do on recruiting or equipment or whatever is added on to the 40 hours a week, whatever it is that they're doing. And if they overdo it, then chances are it's going to burn them out in some sort of way, and they're not going to be as effective in the things that need to be as effective in. Yeah. So it's kind of what you talked about in terms of, as the head coach, delegating and understanding what things can no longer be delegated because there's not somebody available to do, as opposed to not somebody who doesn't know how to do it yet, because that's a different thing.
Right.
One is a training situation. One is that just doesn't need to get done.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk about this cascading effect of delegation, right? Like, or there's a concept in the book that talks about above the line and below the line.
Mhm.
And the things that are above the line for me, I need to spend time on. And those are the things that merit my time and attention, because my time is it's a commodity that I need to protect. And so I need to spend time on only the things that I think are going to move the dial for my program. And then other things can be delegated. Not that everything's not important, but it needs to fall into a pretty big area for me to spend my time on. Well, my assistants then, and then the things that are below the line get delegated, but then they have their line as well. What's above the line for them that they should be spending their time on that only they can do? So for instance, my assistant that knows data volley and stats and all the technical part of things, he needs to spend time on that. It's above the line for him, but not all of it. Now we have a technical director. So, doing some, worksheets and doing some other things that don't merit his time, he's going to delegate. That's going to go below his line. So yeah, it's a cascading effect. But I think those lines drawn are really important to understanding what does merit your time and attention. What are the most important things for you to be spending your time on?
So it comes down to, priorities obviously play a huge role here in terms of where you're going to allocate your time. So from your perspective, I think we could probably all agree that the talent in your team is a huge factor in winning and losing. Now, I hesitate to use the term success there because that has different connotations to it.
Right.
Beyond that, from your perspective, what are the things that drive the overall performance of your program?
That's a great question. I think the things it's understanding what are the most important things to invest your time in. And so for us, I've made a decision. How do I put this? Without, it sounding simple, but, so culture is something that you need to invest your time in. And I think some coaches, say that, but don't necessarily invest the time. So I've made a decision many, many years ago that was going to be a very defining factor of my program. And so, so number one, we invest in, the DISC behavioral system, and that we spend a lot of time on helping the staff and the players understand each other so we can learn how to communicate better. We don't spend a small amount of time. We spend a large amount of time on that. We also spend a lot of time on communicating on maybe conflict management type things, or how do you create what you want by how you respond to situations. We talk a lot about, we don't just let things kind of get swept under the rug. Like if things come up, we talk about them. And then just, I think, teaching the players and helping them understand that they have the ability to, how they respond to situations is going to make their experience. And so we talk a lot about that. So I think maybe that's one of the defining things for me in our program. And then past that, I think, I've got a lot of systems in place. I really do. There's we have things that just happen without a lot of time and energy being spent on them. And again, I think that's really important.
Yeah. And it's the whole prioritization thing and all the stuff that we're talking about here. Obviously we're talking about it in the context of management of a program. So a lot of people might be thinking, well, okay, this is for college coaches or would-be college coaches. Right. And to a degree, that's partly true because there are certain things that happen at the college level that you're just not going to have if you're coaching juniors, if you're coaching high school. But when you're thinking in the context of priorities, it's still something that relates to coaching overall, because you're still making decisions where you're putting your time and effort. I mean, we were talking before we started about service eve. Well, if you think you need to get better at service eve, then you're going to presumably put more time into that rather than being scattershot and all over the place. So as much as the content of the book and this conversation may be organizational in regard, you expand your mind a little bit and understand that it's not just about the off-court stuff, because there's a lot of stuff that goes into it on the court.
Yeah, no, John, I think that's a really good point. And I think a big premise of the book is that this whole thing is about managing people, right? So whether you're a sports team or a business or a family, whatever. And management of the actual team is part of that. So, decisions on where you're going to spend your time on, what is the focus for the week, and what do you need, what is above the line this week, and what's below the line that you just don't have time to spend on. What's above the line for the season? What can I not do as a head coach that I need to delegate to an assistant? Or like maybe it's I've got to get my setter more offensive. And so I don't have time to spend time with my setter this week. So I'm going to make sure my assistant spends time with my setter this week. Or I'm going to go to my setter and I'm going to go, hey, get someone to toss balls to you because you need to get more offensive and get some reps in doing some setter dumps to these, 3 zones. Now you've delegated to your setter or to maybe your captain. So yeah, I think the principles apply to the actual sport of volleyball for sure. And when I think of club volleyball, John, I actually think it's a huge deal for them because I see them as a business, probably a larger business than even a collegiate volleyball program with all the things that they manage. And I think this book would be really helpful for them. Yeah,
agreed. Yeah, if you're a club director, obviously at the coach level, a lot of them are just there to be on the court.
Yeah.
And that's what they want. And it's always interesting to talk to them about wanting to move up into the college ranks and throwing some cold water and say, hey, there's a way more than, just being able to bang balls on the court and run drills.
That's right.
That's not what college coaching is about. That's only part of it.
That's right.
But you brought up the idea of delegation to players. And that was something I was going to mention is as coaches, obviously during play, never mind what happens in other situations, but obviously during play, we're not on the court with them. We are inherently delegating responsibility to them to play the game that we're trying to play the game. And whether that means the setter makes a different sort of offensive call, or the middle blocker calls a different scheme with your block, or whatever. And then, kind of drilling it down, you mentioned the captains, getting some people to help out in the gym and things like that. As part of our roles as coaches, we're obviously also trying to develop leaders in our program. And all of this stuff that we're talking about as coaches applies to them just as much as it does to us.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think about the principles in my book all the time as it relates to my team. It's of course I wrote the book this summer during COVID, and so my mind doesn't go very far from the principles of this book right now. And I've been trying to think of some examples right as you start talking about that, but I've referred to the concepts numerous times with my team. As we talk, I'll think of some examples of that, but I think that's a really great point of, this applies to leadership, not just assistants, but of course leaders are, an extension of the staff. I think there's a lot that has to do with that. I'm trying to think of examples, but they're there for sure. They'll probably come up as we keep talking. Well,
side question. Would the book have gotten written over the summer if there hadn't been COVID? Had you guys already planned it? Or just,
no.
Just...
Yeah. So Leo, we had done, I think 3 years of presentations at the convention. And then we had done a couple of others with a couple different groups. And so Leo Hopf is my co-author, and he started off as just a volleyball fan. Him and his wife Harriet, great fans of the program. He played, kind of intramural wise, and she was actually a collegiate Division I athlete. And it wasn't until, I went to him and asked him, I knew what he did, and we had a few conversations, but I went to him and asked him to, really, have some deeper conversations about this concept of management. And I have a business degree as well. So, and my family come from small business owners, right? So, but really kind of dialing in some of these concepts. So when I asked him, so we'd done this stuff, and I said, hey, how would you feel about going to the Final Four and presenting with me at the AVCA convention? He was all in. I mean, the chance to go to the Final Four, he was stoked. So we've done that the last 3 years and had, a great time just hanging out at the convention. And he reached out to me a couple of weeks into COVID. And I think we probably mentioned that, getting some material put together, but maybe mentioned a book. But hey, do you want to write a book, Beth? I go, absolutely not, Leo. No, I don't. And he came back, a week later and asked again. And, he said, let's just do it for a few weeks, and we'll invest 10 hours a week. And probably you can read, get it from reading the book, is he's a very organized person. And so we had systems in place for writing this book. We had our standing times, we had our standing Zooms, we had our responsibilities. So it was actually a great experience, just the writing of the book. So once we started getting into it and we could start seeing the vision of it, we weren't not going to do it. It was a pretty cool experience. So.
Right. Having done a few books myself, there's definitely the rewarding factor for sure when you're done and you actually have that physical book in your hands. It's not quite, obviously we're in the world of ebooks and audiobooks and all that. You can't hold an ebook, you can't hold an audiobook. When you can actually hold a physical book, there's just something like, wow, I made this is cool.
I've actually, I used to read a lot, and then probably just like everybody else, stopped reading as much when, I don't know, started getting more into some other things like social media and, and I did Kindle for a while. Since I actually wrote this book, I've been getting on and buying books again. And, I'm plowing through them now because I'm remembering, just the great value of them,
Yeah. The joy of reading.
Yeah.
That's, unlike a lot of people, I guess, I never stopped. I've been a reader all my whole life. So I can't imagine not being a reader.
Yeah.
Now, admittedly, a lot of it's fiction because that's my leisure reading, but that's fiction in there too.
Good on you. I get distracted sometimes, and honestly, when I first got into the Pac-12, a lot of things in my life stopped. So
Yeah.
reading was one of them. I got preoccupied with some other things. So
Yeah,
yeah.
well, it happens. Life is that way. All right, so we've kind of talked about like the delegation. Like the next big concept in the book was A, B, and C performers,
Yeah.
and how obviously you got to recognize and identify them, but then also figure out how to manage them. One of the thoughts that comes to mind is this on a curve? So is there always going to be somebody that's a C performer just because of numbers, or is that kind of a specific line? It's like, no, okay, below this line, you're definitely a C. Above this line, we're not going to grade you on a curve.
I definitely I see the world in, you know, star and C performers now. So, but I don't know for sure, but I do think that I think we've all had C performers in our programs, and we just haven't necessarily identified that maybe they are taking up too much time and attention of ours in relationship to our job to try to, you know, mentor the entire all the players and teach and win. And so I think the difference is just understanding that more than likely you do have C performers in the program, and hopefully you have star performers, also A performers. So how do you just getting more diligent and intentional with how to deal with them and what to do, and, you know, mostly how to identify the fact that are you spending too much time on them? And then if you are, how are you going to mentor them to get them better? And then if that's not working, then you need to, you know, put the team before the individual, and you have to make some decisions on if they're holding the team back, whether it's a player or a staff member. Then you have to, your responsibility is to win and to move the process along for the entire team of, you know, the educational process. And if that's, you know, if they're holding back, then you need to think about, you know, what's next.
Well, I imagine that's probably, conceptually, it's probably fairly easy for people to grasp the idea. But for those of us coming at it with a coaching mentality or a teaching mentality, there's always that drive to, you take that kid and you make them better. Or you take that assistant coach and you make them better. The hard part has to be realizing, okay, this is a not a negative sum prospect, but it's the balance is not in my favor in terms of the amount of time I'm going to have to put in to either bringing them up or fixing their mistakes or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, John, I'm horrible at it. I mean, this has been something probably that's been an Achilles, you know, heel for me, that I'm the same way. Like I want to make that person better, and I want to help them, and I want to teach and mentor and bring them along. And in fact, I love that part of the job. But at some point, you know, what I've come to learn is that they might be better off if you make decisions to help them to move on to some different experiences. Their experience might not be that great. So where you're thinking, you know, you're going to save them, it might be better for them to, you know, to help them move on to another situation. And I've kind of come to terms with that not everybody is cut out for the level that we're at. And I'm not cutting players left and right, but there's definitely been more conversations probably, and including staff members, you know, for sure, not just players, but just conversations about the experience they're having and what they want out of it. And if it's not fitting, you know, and it's not matching with what we're trying to do, then, you know, maybe a change needs to happen. So yeah, I'm with you, John. I get it. That's something that I've struggled with, but I've come to terms with that. Like, it's not just about the team. It's maybe better for the player as well, or the staff member. So.
Yeah. Do you get any help with someone like Leo to kind of, hey, if you're not seeing it, how much time you're putting into this person or part of your program?
Yeah, Leo and his wife have just become really great friends. So that's a bonus also, that they not only see our program really well, I actually have just a lot of conversations with them.
Mm-hmm.
And Leo's very black and white, and I'm not, I'm not. And so he's actually pretty good with me. Like, he'll make really blanketed statements sometimes, and I'll go, Leo, listen to what you just said. I can't do that. And he's like, oh yeah, you're right. That's what I would do in business. But no, his perspective is very important. It's been really good for me, and just as a friend and kind of mentor also.
Yeah, I think that's unfortunately, a lot of us don't have someone with a fresh set of eyes that evaluates what we're doing. Not necessarily formally, but even just informally. Theoretically, there are certain circumstances. You're a club coach, your technical director, or your club director, or somebody's kind of overseeing you. But I know a lot of those club directors feel overworked just trying to keep things running, and don't necessarily get to spend as much time, supervising as probably they should.
Yeah.
A lot of us work for athletic directors who are not former coaches, which is different than it used to be in a lot of places, especially at the higher levels in Division I, where the focus for those people tends to be more about fundraising, and you have to build new facilities and alumni relationships and things that aren't kind of in the coaching realm. So again, you don't get perhaps the supervision and oversight or alternate perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we get it from other coaches, but let's face it, other coaches are usually busy trying to figure out what they're doing with their own program. So it seems to me that's an area where people can kind of try to reach out and find some people that maybe could offer that perspective.
I think one of the things that I hope to come from this book is to help people understand that there's other realms of the world that can help your coaching. There's other entities that you could bring in and that are going to, improve what you do. And so whether it's business or, philosophy, or let's say a mental health expert, or, sports scientists, and a lot of people aren't going to be able to have those people on staff. Right. But if you can reach out and bring the best practices and the concepts and ideas from other areas, that it's going to make you a better coach. And, so this book, kind of brought business into the athletic world, but it's also bringing, sports into the business world. And there's a synergy going on within this book about, how, like sports does the best job at passion and the best job at team building. And to be honest, individual building, because in business, they don't really maybe invest in the individual or the team. And then, so they can take that from sports. And then of course we can take, more organizational stuff and functioning and systems from the business world, but that's from there's all kinds of different areas. So I think that's a very good point, John. And I think reaching out to other people to get their perspective from a different vantage point, hey, let's go have a drink and let's talk about, what is it? What's your perspective on this issue from your seat on the bus? And I think there's a whole world of opportunity out there for coaches to, go and reach out to other areas. So, yeah.
Yeah. Especially if we get past the ego thinking that we know best or that we know everything.
Yeah. Ego doesn't do anybody much good.
No. Okay. So with respect to the C performers, there's a good chunk of the book where you talk about identifying staff and recruiting players, obviously, and they both kind of have very similar points of view on them in terms of what you look for and how you approach them. And I thought that was a really good section in terms of just how you handle interviewing. And it struck me as a very behavioral type of approach. You're not asking black and white questions, objective questions. You're more asking open-ended stuff and trying to get a feel for who this person is. Because I would imagine that at the basic level, you're trying to say, okay, how do we prevent having C performers?
Right.
While getting as many, star performers as we can. So talk about that aspect of it a little bit.
I think it's one of the hardest things we do, right? Especially in recruiting, like until you really work with them, with players, and until you really see how they're going to respond to tough situations, adversity, challenges, it's hard to know. In terms of recruiting, I've seen players that I didn't think, maybe, I mean, I thought they were obviously good enough for me to recruit them, but I had no idea they were going to excel how they do at our level. And it's because of, their learning ability, their, response to challenges, their mental toughness, et cetera. And those things are really hard to find, from just watching. And then, vice versa, you get someone that you think is just great, and then they don't have a growth mindset. They don't have discipline to come into the gym and get better every day. And then they don't get better. And same with staff, and so, the typical interview questions, they have their patented answers, and it's going to be a nice conversation, and you might dive into, a few things, but it's not really getting to the heart of what they really think, what they really believe, and how they think. You want to figure out, how do they process? How do they problem solve? What's their, what are they pulling from when they are trying to answer a question? And what depth is there to the answer to that question? So we did, in my last hire, we did a series. We brought two people in, and we put them through a series of questions. We call them case studies. Mm-hmm. And we asked them 4 different questions, and they're relevant to our program at the time. And they were very open-ended, and we asked them to solve these issues, and they weren't all issues, but to say, what would you do in this situation? And it was very eye-opening, and it was very strong. And there wasn't bad answers. There was no wrong answers. It was just a matter of watching them develop their answers more than anything. And on 2 of the questions, Malia Soji and I, my associate head coach, we just sat back and actually let Leo ask the questions. And that was really powerful. But then the last 2 questions, Malia, myself, and the candidate problem solved together. Like we looked at the issue together, and then we got to see, like, how did we interact? How did we bounce off of each other ideas and stuff? And I don't look forward to doing it again, because I don't want to lose my staff. But it was very powerful, and I recommend it for any kind of hire. And I've tended to start asking some different questions in the recruiting process as well. And it's maybe a little bit unfair if the athlete's too young, but it's quite an interesting process. So yeah, it's been powerful.
Yeah, the first thing I would say is, for those of you who haven't worked in the business world, they've been using these what they call behavioral questions for a long time. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, if you're interviewing for a head coach job, because you've got senior management involved and HR is heavily involved in those decisions. Not that I'm saying that it's not involved in the more assistant coaches, but you're talking a more institutional level hire than a local staff level hire when you're talking a head coach. Things tend to be more formal, and you get these behavioral, because it's part of what they do university wide. They probably use similar questions when trying to hire faculty, and obviously with different angles, but conceptually the same. Whereas in coaching, a lot of times, hey, if you're hiring an assistant coach, what's your philosophy on? And you kind of chit chat about that, and does that match mine, and those sorts of things. And yeah, that gets you to a certain point, and that's good stuff to understand. And what you're talking about with the players is they probably heard the same question 1,000 times. Tell me about your volleyball experience. And so you could see that little click in their brain, and they start spewing it out. You go, okay, they've said this, they've been practicing this, they've told their coaches this 1,000 times, and you want to get them off of that to find out who they really are.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like for instance, let's say you're talking to a recruit, and they've just been at a club tournament, and you don't ask them, hey, how'd you do? And you will, but and and you talk about the volleyball aspect, and then you throw in like, oh, what did you do on this day? You finish your pool finished like at noon. What did you guys do that day?
Mhm.
And then, whatever, depending on their answer. And all of a sudden you go, oh, and this kid just sat in their room and they were really tired, and, or they're, you can start digging because there's something interesting they did. And then you can
Right.
start digging a little bit more. So it's, yeah, I think, yeah, it's been interesting in the recruiting, just to dig, just go a little deeper and,
Right.
find out more about them. Yeah.
Yeah. And you talked about obviously not wanting to have to do this process again with assistant coach, but inevitably it's going to happen at some point.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned you've had a fairly high turnover of staff because they go on and coach other places. And that kind of brings up for me, and this is, you talked about the lack of development in the business world in a lot of cases. And part of that is the feeling that we're going to lose people. But we can't have that fear if we're going to be as effective, if we're going to build the organizations that are going to be successful.
Yeah, what I realized, the turnover happened even more once when we moved into the Pac-12 10 years ago. And then you have success, that your staff is sought after. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a firm believer in not having fear about the turnover anymore. And it used to be something that you just dreaded, right? Because I don't know, maybe that person was the reason why, maybe that staff member was so embedded in something that they were the reason why you were successful. And what you come to realize is that if you have good systems in place, that, just get another really good person, and I don't want to say the right person, you hopefully it's the right person, but you do the best at getting the best person in that job and fit them into your systems. And now they're also going to be able to bring their flair into the systems that mm-hmm. I have seen a lot of coaches where the assistant turns over and their whole system changes.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's very healthy. You want the systems to stay in place, and you want just new individuals that bring their flavor to it. And so I don't fear it anymore. In fact, I think it's good to get new perspectives on old systems. And, I think it's a good thing.
And you can make a strong case that if you as the head coach are not preparing your program for the departure of your staff, then you're doing yourself a disservice. Because except in a few cases, there are examples of people who've stayed with programs for years. I mean, obviously Denise Corlett being a perfect example of that. But Denise retired, so Kevin had to find somebody to fill that spot. I'm assuming that he prepared that in some way, or Denise prepared it for whoever was coming behind her. But in some way, Stanford volleyball was prepared for the day that Denise decided, okay, my time is done. And that's the sort of thing that we have to do.
I think it's critical. I think, if you really are building a program, those are the kind of things you have to think about. Those are the kind of things you have to spend time on. Excuse me. It's not just about a team for 1 year. It's truly about, what is the program about? What do they spend their time on? What defines them? And then it goes back to the first question that you asked. What defines your program? And these are all the things that define my program. And so things don't change when people leave in our program. I mean, probably whenever I leave, things are going to change drastically, because we've been doing things the same way for a long time because, it works. But I'm also a person that really wants different ideas. If a new assistant or DOPS comes in and they look at our systems and go, hey, I think I can do that better, do it. We'll create a new system. That is not a problem. Or their style just changes the system. I'm all for that. I do like change, surprisingly, even after being here for 31 years. And I think it's really important that you do change, so these systems aren't set in stone, they're just things that kind of help your program function. But if you're not changing them sometimes, then you're going to get in trouble as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking about sometimes you have to tear stuff down
Yes.
because and systems can have this way of getting entrenched
Yep.
and rigid and inflexible, and to the point where at a certain stage they're not useful anymore, and you can't tweak them. And this is a famous thing in business, especially with like software. I saw this a bunch of times. There'd be this legacy software system that, okay, we make this adjustment so we can modernize it a little bit. And then you make this one. At a certain point, you can't do it anymore. It's not worth trying to make that one extra change. You just have to say, okay, strip it out. We got to go back to basics.
Yep. Yeah, I talk about that in the book a little bit, where when we did go into the Pac-12, that I ripped every aspect of our program apart, and there wasn't one thing that I didn't look at, that I asked the question, what can we do to make that better? And it really paid off. I think, again, if you're thinking about kind of program and I know times have changed and longevity isn't as a thing as much as it has been for me through the years. But if you really want to build a solid program that's going to stand, the course of time, then looking at things and creating things foundationally is going to pay off down the road, versus just trying to get some quick fixes, for the time being. And I say that, and I understand, it's a lot more competitive world, especially at my level, that, people don't have as much time to find success. But boy, getting those foundational stones in place, I think, are everything to build something off of. Really important.
Right. Kind of continue on that. And this is the kind of the last thing that I wanted to bring up was if you were taking over a new program, or you're in a situation where you just want to do a complete reevaluation of where you are and looking at what you might have to change, where would you start that process? What things would you focus on to begin with?
Probably recruiting. I think that would be I think you want to dissect the state of the recruiting of the new program. You want to understand your local and region recruiting. You want to understand your university and figure out, what are the strengths? What can you recruit? How can you recruit? That would absolutely be the first place I would start. And then, and then probably from there, just the organization of it all. I would figure out who my people are and what can they do for me. What are my resources that I have available? And then how can I delegate as much as I can to start spending the time on the things that are going to help us, move the dial. So yeah, I think looking for the resources that are available and understanding that, maybe, spending time on increasing those resources. If you don't have the resources, it's probably one of the, pretty important things, figure out how do you increase those resources.
Yeah.
And it can be as simple as, one of the things we talk about in the book, John, and I know you've read that, is that, you might not have a lot of money to increase resources. So now you get creative. And when you talk about the difference between coaches, it's not always, in success and winning and programs, it's not just about the money. In fact, it's very seldom about the money. It's about, the creative ways of getting resources into your program that can help you, win. So, for instance, I didn't have a lot of extra, we call them $12 an hour type employees in my program that we needed to delegate stuff to, so we could spend time, for instance, statistics and analytics. We needed to find some people that could do some data entry, so we could spend time analyzing the data.
Right.
And so we went to the math department, and we went to, these different departments on campus, and we found, a couple really good young people that were able to really help our program, and for very minimal amount of money. So yeah, to answer your question, I'd start with recruiting, and then I I'd quickly go to increasing resources.
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of younger coaches tend to focus on the team they have on the court, and they put all their attention on that. They kind of forget about all the stuff that goes around it. Going back to our initial point, maybe 90% of your success comes from.
Yeah, I can't believe I didn't even mention the team in the response to that question.
See?
You're right. I mean, if you don't have the foundation built, you can work on attacking line all you want, but until you got your recruiting in place and all these other things that are going to help you, it's not going to help if you can hit line.
All right. Any final words you'd want to toss out there?
I don't think so. I'm humbled by the interest in the book. I found it very interesting that from every level, to be honest, of sport, and then it has shown interest in this book, and the business world is showing extreme interest in this book that we weren't quite, I think we thought it was a possibility. It's being used now in 2 classes as primary textbooks.
Nice.
And so I do think it offers something for everyone. I'm very excited about it. But more than I started it, I've always wanted to give back to the sport. And really, that's kind of why I started doing any of this, is that these are some best practices that I've learned. And I want our sport to be great, and I want businesses to be great too, but I love the sport of volleyball. And if I can impart, some of this stuff on any coach, I think there's stuff in there for established coaches as well, then I'm excited. So yeah, I'm excited about it. I don't think I don't know. I don't think I'm going to get rich on it. I think that it was a labor of love of these are the things that I've learned through the course of my career and that are really helping, and maybe they can help your program and what you're doing. So that's why I wrote it anyways.
All right. That's a good spot to end it on.